I knew he was going to die the moment he coughed. It wasn't the blood. People always think it's the blood that makes it dramatic. It's not. Blood is honest. Blood tells you the story plainly. This was quieter. A small, stubborn cough like his body clearing its throat before delivering bad news. I was already stepping back. You learn to step back. The room smelled of vinegar, sweat, and fear, the holy trinity of my profession. I adjusted my mask, the long leather beak stuffed with rosemary, juniper, cloves, and enough garlic to repel not just disease, but most of society. The family stared at me as if I were both savior and executioner. I suppose I was neither. I was a man in a bird costume holding a stick, trying to poke death from 6 feet away. He reached for my sleeve. I did not let him touch me there. That's the part no one likes to say aloud. We talk about courage, we talk about sacrifice, but no one talks about how you flinch. I pressed the wooden rod gently against his shoulder, inspecting the swelling beneath his arm. A bubo, hard, angry, blooming like a grotesque flower. I had seen thousands, each one a signature of something we could not see, could not reason with, could not negotiate. An invisible adversary, no face, no sword, no banner to charge at. We cannot duel fog. I told the family to open the windows. They hesitated. It was winter. I insisted. Fresh air was believed to disperse the miasma, the poisonous vapors we were certain caused this catastrophe. It made sense in a way. The city smelled like rot and sewage and unwashed humanity. If evil had a scent, it would smell like Tuesday in the alleyways. So we burned herbs. We fumigated rooms. We lanced buboes. We prescribed Theriacan, expensive compound of dozens of ingredients, including opium, and, if rumor was correct, powdered unicorn horn. Spoiler, the unicorn did not survive. We bled patients. Because when in doubt, remove blood. That was medicine's version of have you tried turning it off and on again? He coughed again. Wet this time. I gave instructions with the calm authority expected of me. Isolate him. Burn his bedding. Pray. Always pray. It cost nothing, and statistically speaking, had similar success rates to most of our treatments. When I left the house, the mother fell to her knees and thanked me. Thanked me. For what? For naming the monster? You want to know the truth? The mask was not to protect me from disease. Not really. It was to protect me from them, from their eyes. The beak created distance. The glass lenses erased my expression. I became something inhuman, and that was easier. People forgive a monster for being cold. They expect warmth from a man. They say plague doctors were brave. Some were. Some were simply poor physicians hired on fixed contracts paid to treat the sick and document the dead. I signed a municipal agreement during an outbreak in northern Italy. Good pay. Hazard included. Housing provided. A very professional way of saying, we expect you to survive longer than the previous fellow. The contract required me to record deaths, witness wills, and ensure the sick did not wander. Yes, I treated patients, but I was also clerk, notary, quarantine officer, a bureaucrat in a bird mask. Death has paperwork. It's terribly organized. You think the horror is the bodies in the street? It isn't. The horror is routine. At first, I tried everything with fervor. Vinegar washes, herb mixtures, surgical lancing. I memorized Galen. I debated miasma versus contagion theories in candlelit rooms thick with incense. Some whispered that the disease spread person to person. Others insisted it rose from the earth itself. Divine punishment exhaled from hell's basement. I did what doctors do when we don't know what we're doing. I acted confident. Here's a joke for you. My beak was stuffed with flowers, but the city still smelled like a graveyard. If scent caused plague, I would have been immune. Instead, I smelled like a funeral bouquet that learned Latin. The truth is, the mask gave me courage. Not scientific courage. Psychological courage. When I looked in the mirror, I did not see my own fear. I saw an emblem, an omen.
Please, you must
Something
save them.
theatrical enough to convince others I
only
knew what
pray
I was
now.
doing. And sometimes, that was enough to buy them one more day of hope. But hope is a dangerous prescription. Overdose is common. I began to notice patterns. Entire households infected while neighbors remained untouched. Streets where the disease seemed to stalk deliberately. Ships arriving with healthy crews that fell ill days later. Something moved through us. Not air alone. Not divine wrath with selective aim. Invisible. I remember the first time I hesitated before entering a home. Not because of the stench, not because of the screams, because I imagined it whatever it was clinging to, door handles, to fabric, to my gloves. I imagined carrying it from one house to another, delivering death like an unwanted parcel. That thought lodged in my mind like a splinter. You can lance a bubo. You cannot lance doubt. The city bells rang constantly. Funerals blurred together. I began recording names mechanically, ink scratching across parchment while my mind drifted. There is a moment no one warns you about this when compassion becomes arithmetic. 1 more body. 2 more. 5 today. 12 yesterday. Trends, numbers, survival rates. When death becomes data, you either harden or shatter. I chose hardening. It seemed more professional. Another joke? Very well. They paid me well enough to risk my life, but not enough to make me stop counting how many colleagues had already died. Hazard pay is comforting until you realize the hazard is winning. But beneath the cynicism, something gnawed at me. If miasma were the cause,
no contact.
Why did caretakers fall ill
spreads
more
too
often
easily.
than distant neighbors? Why did touching the sick seem so perilous? Why did fleas infest the rats
devil!
that infested our
May
grain
you
stores
burn
just
for this!
before outbreaks
He's
intensified?
dying because of you!
I had no microscope, no bacterium to name, only suspicion. Suspicion is a lonely companion. I stopped allowing patients to touch me. I washed obsessively in vinegar. I burned my outer garments. I enforced isolation more strictly than some priests enforced confession. Families cursed me for separating them from loved ones. I endured it, better anger than another corpse. And yet they still died. That is the toll no one sketches in those dramatic engravings. The man in the beaked mask standing amid chaos. They draw the mask. They draw the staff. They do not draw the insomnia. They do not draw the quiet dread that perhaps you are not a healer at all but a witness. A well-dressed spectator to catastrophe. That night, after the coughing man died as I knew he would die, removed the mask alone in my quarters. The indentations from the leather pressed into my skin. My face smelled of herbs and sweat. I stared at myself in a small polished mirror. Without the beak, I looked fragile. I wondered how many more doors I could knock on before I began to believe I was carrying the plague rather than fighting it. Because here is the most dangerous thought of all. What if the monster is not in the air? What if it walks with me? I slept poorly that night, and the bells did not stop ringing. The thought followed me for weeks. What if I was the courier? So I did something radical not by your standards, but by mine. I stopped trusting tradition. I noticed the attendants who washed their hands in vinegar more obsessively fell ill less often. I insisted on burning contaminated clothing. I forced stricter quarantines. I separated the sick from the healthy, even when families cursed my name. Not because I was heartless, but because I was beginning to suspect the enemy rode on contact, not curses. They called me paranoid. Good. Paranoia is just caution that survived long enough to be right. Deaths slowed in certain districts. Not everywhere.
Keep
Not
away from
perfectly.
him.
But enough.
Brings only sorrow.
Enough to whisper that maybe the monster wasn't divine fog. Maybe it was something smaller. Something alive. I would never see a bacterium. I would never know the word Yersinia pestis. But I learned this. Ignorance is deadly. Pride is deadlier. And sometimes progress begins when a frightened man in a ridiculous bird mask dares to doubt his own certainty. The bells eventually rang less. Not because we won, but because we learned to stop helping the plague win.